Today I'm going to show you one of the best endgames I ever played, because I think that it is really interesting and instructive. So in this position I played queen on f3 check, and my opponent answered with queen on f6. Now that's exactly the move I wanted, and it's important to understand what piece you need to trade in a certain position. As you can see, if I manage to trade queens, it's going to be a pair of knights against the couple of bishops. And I know for the fact that the couple of bishop is stronger. And if you look at this position, it's not so closed. I mean, it's not even that open, but certainly my bishop can be pretty good. So for this reason, I really wanted to play queens, because I thought the endgame was winning or gave me a chance to win. Certainly black doesn't have a chance to win in this endgame, and I was right. So I played queens, which, I mean, is really logical, and my opponent decided to take with the knight. Now, I don't know why he took with the knight. Taking with the pawn was, I think, much more logical. You just have a better starter after that, but I don't know. He decided to take with the knight, and now this pawn is really weak. He's also pinned. Obviously, I just have a bishop attacking it, so it's not going to be a big problem for him, but I don't know. I felt like taking with the pawn was better for him than taking with the knight. And in this position I played bishop on d6. It makes sense in an endgame with equal material, despite the fact that I have bishop and he has knights. You need to find your opponent's weakness and try to target it. And why? First of all, if you target a weakness, you might win it. But if it's not winnable and your opponent has to defend it, otherwise you win a pawn, for example, or you win a piece, it might create another weakness. So for this reason, I decided to attack this pawn, because if you want to defend it, you basically have to play pawn on b6, and at this point, the pawn on a7 is pretty weak, and this knight is undefended. So attacking one weakness, I created two of them. And that's really important. Now, since this knight is weak, and I really want to play bishop on a8, targeting this pawn because it's another weakness, I might try to target this knight first. So I played bishop on b5. And if you move the knight, I have bishop on b8, and that's my point. So he moved the knight, and I played bishop on b8. Now, it's not over. White is definitely better. If someone can win this endgame, is white. And as you can see, that's the power of bishops. The pair of bishops can control a lot of squares. Knights are good, are tricky, but knights are pretty slow. If I have the pair of bishop, I can reach center square much quicker than him. And that's really important. So now I attack the pawn on a7, but you can defend it. You can play knight on c8, or you can just push the pawn. And he decided to push the pawn. He played pawn on a5, which is a good move, obviously. And now this creates another weakness, and I keep creating weakness till I can win something. The point is that pawns can't go backward. So there's going to be a time where I can actually win a pawn, because he can't push it and he might not be able to defend it. So now this pawn is a target, and I can decide to play, for example, bishop on c7 or bishop on a7. The point is that if I play bishop on c7, now he can play knight on d5. I think both knights on d5 doesn't make a ton of difference. And knight on d5 attacks my bishop and still defend the pawn. And if I play bishop on e7, he can play knight on c8. After that, the knight is misplaced, but I might have something better to do. So in this position, a better move was just moving the king. For example, king on e2 was just a really logical move, which I didn't play though. And I decided to play bishop on a7, missing the fact that after knight on c8, he can defend everything. Somehow, he can actually defend everything. Now the only move obviously is retreating the bishop back. Well, he could go back, and at the point I might play something else. So I play king on e2, for example. But in this position, my opponent decided to play knight on d5, and now I missed a move that apparently was really strong. Computer is suggesting to play c4. The problem is that after c4 you have knight on b4. So I thought that was just a really bad move, but apparently you can sack this pawn. And I guess you want to attack the knight and win this pawn later. I mean, that's a really complicated move to find, honestly, so that makes sense that I didn't find that. So going back, instead of playing c4 because I didn't see that line, I just decided to play king on e2, and king on e2 is logical. Now, another thing about endgames, the fact is that you don't need to play the endgame like an engine, because I mean, you're going to play against humans. Now, Stockfish might suggest really wide and complicated lines, but probably the best way to win against your opponent is not trying to find something really complicated, but is trying to play logically, and you're going to win slowly instead of doing really risky things. Because, I mean, they are not going to play precisely as you, because they're not Stockfish, and that makes sense. So my opponent now played king on e7, and I replayed the bishop, playing bishop on e5. Now, bishop on e5 makes sense, because attack this weakness, and if you push it, you have another weakness, and you also have dark square weaknesses if you push this pawn, and that's really important. Also, as you can see, he's controlling a lot of square. This bishop is pretty strong, so that makes sense. My opponent replied with g6, which again makes sense. You just defend the weakness this way, but you create other ones. And that's my point, that's why I'm doing this. Now I played d4. d4, I think, is a pretty good move. Because if you take, and I mean, computer is saying you can take, but that's pretty difficult at the point. If you take, I'm not going to take with the pawn, obviously. I'm going to take with the bishop. And this pawn is isolated. This pawn can't move, and it's attacked by the bishop. My plan is playing bishop on a6, winning the knight, and then I can win the pawn. So that's a really risky move to play, and white definitely stand much better at this point. So instead of doing this, my opponent decided to play knight on d6. And now I missed two moves, and again, I missed them, but Stockfish really wants to get into a complicated position. I feel like there are better chances for me than doing what Stockfish wanted to do. It says that I can take the pawn, and after knight take, I have c4. That makes sense, but after this, I had to take the knight, e-take, I take this pawn, and after the knight take back, I mean, yeah, my opponent is plenty of weaknesses, although we still have 4 pawns, he still has a knight, I still have a bishop. Okay, this is weak, but I don't know if it's undefendable or not. Let's say I play bishop on c7, you have knight on c4, and then I play this, I guess. Yeah, but you have king on d7, bishop on f4, and as you can see, I'm not going to lose material again, so I'm not really sure about the discontinuation. I mean, computer obviously sees a line to win a pawn, I guess, but if you don't see the line, you might think this is a draw, and that makes sense. So for this reason, I didn't play this move. So going back, after my opponent played knight on d6, I just play logically and I play bishop on d3, and again, that's the thing that I suggest you to do. Because it's kinda pointless to play really complicated lines if you don't see 30 move in the future. You might want to play something logical that allow you to win in the long run. And if I keep my bishops, that might be enough, because it still has a lot of weaknesses. And I feel like I'm actually making progresses. So he moved the king, and I just decided to take the pawn. Now taking the pawn makes sense, because after he takes back, now these pawns are isolated too, and as you see, I'm just playing logically, but I'm slowly gaining an advantage. Now he has 3 isolated pawns and 1 pawn island with a weakness on h7. So at this point I play g4, G4 makes sense. I want to prevent knight on f5. I thought that knight on f5 would have been pretty annoying. Maybe it wasn't, but yeah, I thought g4 was a clever move. My opponent is trying to without the knight, attacking my bishop, and now I played bishop on g3. Now, you can play knight on g5, but after you play knight on g5, I mean, I feel like I can play h4. Don't think there is a problem. Yeah, there is h4, there is also bishop check, and the bishop gets in, so definitely is not a good move. My opponent decided to play e5 instead, but the problem of e5 is that now this is a target for my bishop, and also his knights are on the same diagonal. So for this reason, I decided to play bishop on c4. So if you move the knight, you lose this. So now also this knight is pretty weak. He decided to defend it, and now I played king on d3. King on d3 makes sense, because if I can play king on e4, I keep putting pressure on this pawn and even on the knight. So my opponent played knight on d8, which is kind of a wild move. I mean, it's pretty passive, and there is definitely something to play in this position. Now Stockfish is suggesting to play g5, but after he plays something like knight on e6, I just give him a target, so I wasn't sure about that. And I played again another really logical move that gives me a lot of chance to win. And this move is actually taking the knight. Now, I say that the pair of bishop is better than the knight, so why am I taking the knight with my bishop? Well, because after the king take, I have c4. And after the king goes back, I have king on e4. And I have a point. Yes, it's true that you can defend this pawn, but if I'm able to put you in a 2-1 position where you can't basically move something, otherwise you lose a pawn, I just win. And as you can see, this king now is pretty strong. This pawn is really weak, my bishop is targeting it. My opponent played knight on c6, and as you can see, practically speaking, now I have a lot of chance to win. In fact, it's almost +2. If I find bishop on f2 or bishop on e1, for example, but even a4. And now I'll show you the winning move, which, I mean, yeah, is bishop on f2, but even a4. Let's say I play a4. You can't really move the knight because otherwise you lose the pawn, so you need to do something else. If you play, for example, g5, that doesn't work, because I have bishop on e1 and bishop on c3. And I have a point, after I play this, let's say you want to defend the pawn, I play bishop on c3, and now you are in a 2-1 position, as I said. Because you can't move this pawn, otherwise you lose it, everything is blocked. If you move the king, I get in and I win, and if you move the knight, I'm going to win the pawn. So now it's over. And that's basically the winning plan. That's what you're supposed to do in order to win. Which, I mean, is a thing that I didn't see, but I understood how to win the endgame. I understood that I had to try to find a way to choose one game, but instead of doing that, I played a3. And a3 makes sense, I just prevented the knight from getting on b4. And let's say he plays a4. I thought I had a way to choose one game, but after a4, I actually don't. Because at this point, if I play bishop on e1, he keep doing his thing, but even if he pushes the pawn, I don't think that's a problem. In fact, it's not. They play this and they play something like this. Okay, now there is bishop on g3, but let's say I keep going for this plan, bishop on c3, and just showing you how this works. The difference now is that you can play knight on d4, because in the other line there was a bishop on a5, which was a target, so I could have taken it, but this time there isn't. So the knight defends everything, and that's a draw. Now, don't think about this position, because now I played h6. But let's say I played another move, this would have been a draw. Now I have bishop on e1, which again is a really complicated move, I think, to find. So going back, my opponent decided to play g5, and g5 again is a bad move, because it allows me to play a4. But I played a3 because I thought that made sense. I thought I was winning actually in this position. because I missed all the a4 idea, it wasn't easy to see, and I decided to play h4 instead. And I thought that h4 made a lot of sense, because if you take, I take with the bishop, and after that I can go back, targeting this weakness, and you're going to be in Zugzwang. Even if you play a4, you're going to be in Zugzwang at a certain point, because I can target this pawn. The point was, let's say he plays a4, I just play this, you play something like this, and now I just play bishop on h2, something like that. If you move the knight, you lose this pawn at this time, so you can't even push the pawn. So I thought I was winning, but I missed the fact that he has knight on a5, and knight on a5 unfortunately attack this, and yes, I can win this pawn, he's going to win this, but that's not enough to win. And that's a thing that I missed. I thought I was winning, so for this reason I played this. But my opponent believed me. He really believed me, and he played h6. Maybe because he was scared just about the fact that with the bishop on h4 I can't even get in this way, which yeah, looks certainly scary. But at this point I have the winning move. And at this point we are going to reach a really cool position, and I guess it's really rare to see a position like this, I mean in a real game, because I take, pawn take, and as you can see he has 4 pawns, and all of these pawns are isolated and are on dark squares. And it's plus 2.5, because you can understand that in this position this knight like is 3 point and this bishop is like 5. This bishop is crazy now. He has 4 weaknesses, because all these pawns are weak, and all these weaknesses are on dark square. That's a crazy position, and as you see I played logically. It's clear that I missed something, but I managed, playing logically, to reach a position like this, and that allowed me to win, because I don't have to find a really crazy move, I don't have to calculate 50 moves in the future. Now it's kinda easy to win, because I can play a lot of moves. Again, I could play a4, but I really wasn't into it. But there is another winning move, which is bishop on f2. And with bishop on f2, you have a lot of problems, because even if you cover with knight on d4, as my opponent played, I can play bishop on e3. Bishop on e3 attacking this pawn, and now you can't defend everything, you just can't, you have too many weaknesses. And as you see, this bishop now is just unstoppable. My opponent defended the pawn this way, but now that the king move, he creates another weakness, which is d square, and now I can put the king there. King on d5, king on d5, attack this pawn. This pawn is under some pressure. The knight is under some pressure, the pawn is under the pressure of the bishop too, if the knight moves. He played knight on b3, but at this point I can just win the pawn. I win the pawn. He played a4, defending the knight, but now I don't care, I can just move the bishop. He moves the knight, and now I need to play actively. I can't give him too much time to do whatever he wants. And I can play c5, which obviously wins, but I thought I was pretty clever playing this move, which I mean is true. With the move that I played, I give him 0 chance to survive. Absolutely 0 chance, because now he's just down a pawn. But after they play bishop on c3, you're going to be down 2 pawns. And yes, you can play knight on d3, defending it, but the point is that now I can still play c5. And if you move the knight, you lose the pawn. If you move the king, you lose the pawn, because I can take with the bishop. But you need to stop the pawn somehow. So basically, playing bishop on c3 implies that you're going to lose another pawn. So it's going to be 4 pawns against 2, which gives your opponent absolutely 0 chance to survive. He played knight on f4, which gives a check, but now, again, I need to be active, I can't go back. I mean, I could go back, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. If you want to win, you need to go forward in this endgame, because you have this pawn, which is the most important asset you have. And if you can make a queen, obviously it's over. So for this reason, I played king on d6 and my opponent resigned. Why? My opponent resigned because, let's say, you move the knight, I take with check, so I win another pawn and then I push. Move the king, again, I take and I push, or I can push right away. Another plan is that if you move the king, I can play king on d7. So there is the opposition between the two kings, and my pawn is absolutely defended, and I can make a queen. And that's how you take advantage of all of these weaknesses. So in the end, to win an endgame, first of all, you need to consider the difference between pieces. Because if it's a really close position, you want the knight. If he's open or kinda open, usually the bishop is stronger. And in the position that I was in, which was starting to open, having a pair of bishop is much better than having a pair of knight, as you can see, because I can control more squares and my bishop are much more faster than knights. So I took advantage of that and I played logical moves in order to reach a position that is winning, because my opponent had too many weaknesses. So I think this was a pretty interesting endgame, and I hope that you learned something with this video. So that's it for today, and see you soon.